Hello once again, everybody. A very good afternoon and a good morning, depending on where you are. A very warm welcome to all of you to the final webinar in the series. As you know, the topic is living wage and overtime. This is a very interesting but a complex and complicated topic, ever evolving. So the way we have designed it is that we will have Nandini Sharma, who is the director at Center for Responsible Business, give you a keynote address where she'll set the context and explain what wage and overtime is. And after that, we'll bring in Kathleen Hansom from Siegwerk. Kathleen will give us a bit of insights and scoop on what Siegwerk is doing and a bit of an overview of living wage vis-a-vis Siegwerk's practices and policies. And after that, we'll dive into the subject. We'll go more into details where my colleague Purushottam Kumar, who is the expert on wage in our office, he will take you through the regulatory aspects, the legal aspects, the global evolution of living wage and overtime, and the current expectations and practices. So, without any delay, let's begin with the webinar. And with this, I warmly invite Nandini to take the floor.
Right. Thank you so much, Neha. A very good afternoon to everybody. I am, just on what you said, Neha, I think probably Purushottam, given that the new wage codes are out, is probably a person much in demand these days in our office. But on that note, I think what you really highlighted, Neha, today, that this is one of those topics that are of great importance. And I would probably say that this is really, wages are really sort of at the cornerstone of social justice and, sort of developing or building a nation which is equitable. So that sort of importance must be attributed to this topic, and I think it's great that we are having this sort of a discussion today on the different aspects of living wages, overtimes, and the many elements that sort of get covered when we talk of this topic. And why I say this is also because and I'm pretty sure that pretty much everybody would agree that salaries and wages that we draw at the end of every month is what really sort of allows us to live a life of dignity, which is a fundamental human right. It is what sort of provides us that safety net during difficult times. It is what sort of sustains us in times of crisis. It is what sort of helps us discharge our responsibilities towards people who we are who are probably dependent on us. So I think, keeping all of that in mind, my congratulations also to Segwork and to all of the participants, all the suppliers who are participating today here, to sort of discuss this with us and sort of co-learn as we move along in this webinar. And now, sort of coming back to the bit on the wage code, which I think this was on the 21st of November. I think there were these new wage codes that were released. And I think, much like everything else, there are some very good positives that emanate from the new wage code. And I'm pretty sure that Purushottam, our colleague here, would be, sort of highlighting these. But just to sort of maybe take you through a couple of them, wherein we're talking about how the state is looking at having a universal minimum wage, which is covering, which is sort of expanded its coverage in terms of including, the gig workers and the media workers. It's talking about how government is encouraging digital payments to, sort of bring in a little more accountability and transparency when it comes to, wages. It is talking about how there needs to be greater thrust that needs to be put in on topics like equal wages for equal work. It is talking about opportunities for women to work during the night shifts, sort of have that kind of a choice when it comes to to working hours. It is talking about very clearly and very specifically how one would calculate overtime. So I think these are all sort of indications also how the government is also expanding its expectations from businesses on ensuring that they incorporate the in their practices, a sense of responsibility. So, so yes, so I think we're seeing the space evolve, and of course, there are always, sort of areas for improvement. But I think what I'd like to sort of, in terms of a message, that I'd like to kind of leave everybody here with is that while the wage codes are being fleshed out, there'll be the rules at a state level that will be thrashed out, and then of course it will become enforceable. What is really important to understand here is that one, that this is, of course, going to come in the realm of compliance. And compliance is the minimum expectation that the government has from businesses. So, no business has the right to be in business if it is not complying by these laws that have been, sort of outlined or delineated. So that's the minimum that is expected. But given, sort of how we're seeing the space of sustainability take center stage, how we're seeing that this is getting more and more mainstream, that there are, there is that sort of from the investor lens, from the community lens, there is a lot more that is expected from businesses. How does a supplier sort of distinguish itself? And here's where I think the need to go beyond compliance comes into the picture. And the second bit is really about, we talk about wages and living wage, and I see there is that sort of tendency to come to a figure, that we arrive at a figure or a number. And I think there is that need to sort of introspect and sort of see that this is not really about arriving at a number. This is really not about, kind of saying that this is the number that is, this is what we define as living wage. Why is that? Is because there are a lot of associated issues and topics that come under the fold of living wage. There are a lot of other things that need to be accounted for when discussing and talking of living wages. And some of those things would include things like, what are your hiring and firing policies? How do you, when you're talking about when somebody exits an organization, how do you ensure the quickest way of, paying out the sort of the social obligations? How do you settle that? How do you revise, the wages? What are the negotiations that happen around it? What is your retrenchment policy? What is the whole issue around collective bargaining when arriving at a wage? These would all sort of be extremely important when we are talking in the context of living wage. And this is where a company, a supplier, a business distinguish itself from just a mere compliant business to being a responsible business. Yeah. And another aspect, and here, because since you're all sort of suppliers, what is also important here, I would think, is when we're talking, and this is when I'm opening up the space of wage and sort of including all these different elements. And one important element here, particularly in the space of suppliers, would be the whole bit on responsible contracting. And I think here I'd like to maybe talk a little and delve a little bit on what are those elements that constitute responsible contracting. And I have a little slide, and I'd like to take you through that. Right. My screen visible to everybody?
Yeah, it's visible. You can
Yeah.
go into the slide share mode. It's visible.
Yeah. Yes. I'm sorry, I'm a little technologically handicapped. So just bear with me for about 30 seconds till I get the. Yeah. All right. So I think you're only able to bring in the conversation of living wage when a supplier is able to get into a contract which has been responsibly signed off on, which means that suppliers and the brands, that or the buyers are supposed to also sort of, so when you come down to wage, it really goes upstream or downstream, right to the brands or the buyers that are sort of negotiating contracts. And here I think the most important elements to look at is, let's say, and I'm going to try and explain this by way of an example. So for example, Let's say you have got you're negotiating a contract with a big buyer, and this requires you to set up a certain plant or a certain sort of structure, which means that you need to probably acquire some land, which or probably use, let's say if you're setting up some plant which requires you to use a lot of water, which is from the community. So what would be very important when you are sort of negotiating these kind of contracts, to do a human rights due diligence, which is to sort of understand what are the impacts of your operations, look at what who is it going to impact, who are those right holders, codify mitigation plans into your contract, so that when you are negotiating your contract price, these then get sort of factored into the prices. Then of course is when you are looking at sort of developing the contract, ensure that there is the right sort of you have everything very clearly spelled out, that you have accountability at every stage, and that it is in a language that is very clearly understood by everybody. Of course, when you are looking at when you're looking at sort of building these contracts or negotiating these contracts, what becomes extremely critical is the whole stakeholder engagement, which means that when you are taking on a certain project or taking on a certain assignment, then it becomes very important that all the people who are going to get impacted, who are sort of stakeholders, I'm not even talking about right holders now, but in general about the stakeholders, their interests get and their concerns get reflected into the contract, because this would have an impact on the timelines, the costing, everything, the lifespan of the project, and how you're going to ensure that at each step you are trying to mitigate or address some of the let's say adverse impacts through these operations. There has to be a very clearly laid out, spelled out fair risk risk allocation. And then, of course, the most important part is the remedy and the grievance mechanisms. So, when looking at contracts, what will be very important is that there is, for anybody who is impacted by these contracts, anybody, and this would include your workforce, they have access to sort of remedy and grievance mechanisms, and this should be very clearly built into the contract. So once you have a contract which is really your sort of point of departure or your starting point, then you're able to sort of accordingly set benchmarks for all the other people who you would be sort of associating or getting into a business engagement with. So like I said, that this I wanted to specifically kind of discuss with everybody here, because this is something that particularly for the suppliers uh, would be very central, or would be very critical to sort of then ensuring that you're able to kind of cascade those sort of benefits down to the down to sort of establishing the right kind of wages for your workforce. So yeah, I just wanted to probably in my keynote talk about these different aspects, just to maybe quickly wrap up and highlight what I sort of recap what I said. I think one is that I think it's really important that when you are talking about living wages, that you unpack wages and look at other associated processes, and that you do not get too obsessed by just calculating a figure or arriving at a number. Two, what is important is that compliances, wages, the wage code is a prerequisite for you to be in business. It's the absolute bare minimum that is required of you, that's expected of you. What you probably over time need to do is to see how you can sort of incorporate elements of greater sort of responsibility into your practices, and that would entail a whole lot of processes. One which is very critical would be the elements around responsible contracting. And with that, I'd like to end. Perhaps I may have, I don't know, Neha, if I exceeded my time, my apologies, but thank you so much for your patient hearing.
Perfect timing, Nandini. Um, but thank you for those points. And I think maybe just a quick mention to some of the participants who may be from out of India. In India, the government has recently launched four codes, and what they have done is they have looked at all existing labor-related laws and condensed them in four codes. So now, and this was released just last week. So we have new and well-defined, let's say, statutory expectations on wage and overtime and other related labor-related issues. And what is interesting is that in India, labor is in the concurrent list. So the state as well as center can make laws around it, can make rules around it, which also makes it very interesting that where your labor is coming from, where you're procuring from, and that's where I think Nandini's point on contracts becomes very, very important. That if you have your contracts in place to you will be able to streamline your processes in a more succinct manner, and
Absolutely.
also go I guess probably also look at your benchmarks and decide how do you in which direction you want to progress. So thank you for that, Nandini. And
Absolutely.
with this, I'd like to bring in Kathleen has been with us for all the webinars. I'm sure everybody already knows her really, really well. She's the global supplier sustainability manager and human rights at Kathleen. So over to you.
Hello. Oh, hello everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's visible.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So another warm welcome from Siegwerk to all your participants. It's really nice to see all of you joining, also to see a lot of people returning, but also a couple of new registries, which is kind of nice that this is taking speed. And especially for the new ones, some of you might know my first slide already, but to give you a bit of an overview, who actually is Siegwerk? Yeah? We're a pretty old company. We were founded 200 years ago, and we're still family owned with our headquarters in Siegburg, which is close to Cologne. But we're active in 35 countries with manufacturing sites and basically delivering markets worldwide. We're delivering inks and coatings mainly for the packaging industry, and we see ourselves as an enabler for a circular economy to really be able to make packaging sustainable, recyclable, reusable, you name it. Another focus of ours is also, let's say, forward-looking. We're addressing a lot the topics of automation and digitalization. And this is the reason we're all here. We also see to be fully sustainable and circular, we need to start with our supply chain as well. And that is why we launched in the middle of this year our sustainable procurement program, SustainUP. So to go a bit more in depth of the topic of our webinar today, I wanted to share a little bit what we are doing, because this topic of living wage and overtime is quite a challenge, but we are also starting to tackle it. And here our board has made a very, very important decision that we want to have fair wages. That means that everybody in our operation will earn a living wage. We have started at the beginning of this year with a living wage analysis. Luckily, we have global data of all the more than 5,000 people working for us, and digging into the detail. What is the living wage by region? What are they earning? What are the additionals they're getting? So it's quite a bit of calculation. You might understand that on a global context, that is quite a challenge. But and we do have identified a few cases where we're looking more into it, but all these will be resolved by next year. And then we've also decided, because this is a continuous exercise, you're having new positions, you're having new people, you're having inflation and everything. So to continuously monitor that every person is earning a living wage. And here it also becomes interesting in overtime. Of course, you shouldn't be working 80 hours a week to be able to earn a living wage. And this is a fairness topic, but it's also a safety topic. Where in chemical industries, if the people are tired, overworked, we're so much increasing the likelihood of accidents happening, or of things getting damaged, mistakes are happening, things like that. That is why we're also committed to keeping a maximum of 60 hours a week, which is according to global standards. But here, of course, always first sticking to the legal topics, because in many countries, like in India, the legal maximum hours per week is less. I think it's 48. But in those countries where we do not have legal maximums, there we're sticking to maximum of the 60 hours. And here you see we've also have done a risk analysis internally where we really have to look into. And here we're working especially in certain countries where we see there's less control and where there's a higher likelihood of having overtime, but also maybe area is not the right word, but certain types of jobs which are under less control. And here we've seen that in-houses are under high risk of having a lot of overtime. For us, in-houses are colleagues working at the plants of our customers. So they're managing the ink operations at our customers. And usually there's between 1 and 3, maximum 5 people. So it's quite few. They're relatively remote. And so we see there's quite a risk. And that is why that is one of the priorities that we're looking into. So just to give you a bit of a glimpse, we do have certain challenges, but from my perspective, the most important thing is to get started, to get on the road for improvements, and then also learn a bit along the way. With this, thank you again for joining. I would then hand over to Purushottam, the expert from SustainUP, and I'm really looking forward to his presentation. Oh, one more thing. Please, if you have any questions, post them in the chat, in the Q&A. If it fits, we will answer them right away, or if not, then we will answer all the questions at the end of the session. So, now you should be free to share your screen, I think.
Purushottam, can you hear us? And the screen is visible.
Yes, I can hear you. And
Okay. Okay, great. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join this critical session. The global focus is on ethical sourcing, and it has never been so sharper. And for Indian manufacturers and partners, it's also very important that they not only stick to the Indian compliances, but also have eye to the global evolving standards that we have. Now, today's discussion is focused on 2 high risk, especially for suppliers. And these high impact areas are living wage and overtime. During this session, we will be discussing this into 2 parts mainly. The first part would be on wage evolution. And here we would establish the strategic context moving beyond the minimum wage concept to understand living wages and their measurement using methodologies like Anchor out of other methodologies that we have, and how they relate to your public BRSR reporting and the business and human rights framework in general. Part 2 will comprise of compliances and risk, where this segment is focused on operations, and we will review the new legal limits under OSH code, dive deep into the mandatory overtime, which is two-time overtime calculation formula, and address specific vulnerability risks such as night shifts and the gender angle, which is uh, night shift for women. Next slide. So we would like to delve into the details and to gaze where we stand today. I would. So I'm also getting the poll in front of my screen. So before we delve into the details, let's quickly gaze where we stand today. And for that, we are asking you to identify the wage standard that currently dictates your payroll for unskilled worker. And this is not about judging the or any judgment, but it simply helps us understand the current baseline and accordingly to tailor the depth of subsequent discussions that we will have. So far, we have 36% participation. Okay, so as we can see, are still votings going on? Okay, so around 41% participation we have, and we can see that approximately 76% states that they are paying minimum wages. 6% responses we have got are paying contract or union wages. National floor wage, we don't have any, and living wage benchmark, we have 18. So we will dive deeper into the living wage benchmarks and different standards that we have, and maybe post the session if there is any questions on living wage benchmark for especially for those who are not following these. And maybe if it's possible, Kathleen can also share the experiences from the suppliers who are already implementing living wages. Now, what this poll suggests that 76% of people are already meeting the legal requirement, at least with respect to India. And in terms of contract and union wages, usually it's higher than minimum wages in case of union wages. But with respect to contract wages, it is something that depends on the reason and how it has been negotiated. So I would say that we are fairly into the right direction. Now we just have to see that how we can progress from, let's say, state minimum wages to living wages. Okay, next slide, Neha. Okay, now we look at the global wage evolution. So global wage evolution or the concept of fair wage is not a very recent phenomenon. It has a long and institutionalized history. And if we go back as far as 1919, when ILO was established, uh, ILO called that a wage is something which should be adequate to maintain a reasonable standard of life. This was solidified later in 1944 in Philadelphia Declaration, where this moral principle was came. I mean, where this discussion happened, and it was decided that labor is not a commodity, but it's something which is important to maintain a reasonable standard of life. And later we see that in 2022, the ILO formally recognized the living wage as central to achieving social justice. And just last year in 2024, the ILO adopted a consensus agreement on the definition and estimation of living wage. Now, this is very important because now we not only have a consensus, but we also have a definition, and this brings a lot of attention towards this in global with respect to global standards or eyes that we have on businesses. And this means that concept is now globally defined and also is backed by a multinational institution. So now it is something which is a permanent fixture in global supply chain, and this is something that will be expected out of every suppliers or stakeholders within the supply chain. Next slide. So now coming back to the Indian context, we had different laws as far as 29 uh, laws that we had, which has been now codified into 4 codes. But if we look at, like it was mentioned earlier, Neha mentioned that we, we in India, it's not only the center, but it's also state, which which has their own set of laws. And in this, we can see that India is taking a massive legislative step and has not only consolidated those 29 complex labor laws into codes, but as recent as on November 21st, they have also announced it. Now, when we look at these old laws, which is very relevant to the discussion that we are having today, there are three that we can think of. One is Minimum Wage Act 1948, which focused on survival minimums, which would entail that what should be the minimum wage that is important for someone to survive. And this didn't have any thought process behind a decent or a fair wage. So that's why this was mandatory in nature. And before that, we also had Payment of Wages Act 1936. Now, this Payment of Wage Act 1936 was something that clearly defined the working hours and times. And in also in 1948, we came up with Factories Act, which also discussed on hours and overtime limits, which was I mean, a kind of a successor to the Payment of Wages Act. Now, in the new regime or the new labor code that we have Code on Wages 2019 that mandates a national floor wage. Now, this wage is not any more limited on survival minimums, but it focuses more on living needs that we have. And then we have OSH Code 2020, which modernizes overtime, night shifts for women and safety, which we will discuss in detail in next slides, future slides. Sorry, I forgot. Next slide. Okay. Now, as a supplier, it also become important that how do we see these codes and how do we align it with our with your or with suppliers reporting requirements. There might be some supplier who must be already reporting under BRSR, and some who would be reporting under BRSR in future. Now, the compliance efforts are not just about passing a buyer audit. It is also about feeding accurate positive data into your mandated BRSR. Now, this report is publicly available and is used by investors and financial institutions. So it also becomes very important that the information or data that has gone into this have taken account of different principles. Now, here we can see that from living wage and overtime, it affects two principles of BRSR directly. One, principle three, which focuses on business, promoting the well-being of all employees, and the essential indicator for that is percentage of employees' salary should always be higher than the minimum wage of those employees. And the second, the leadership indicator that focuses on accidents rates and return to work, which is the attrition rate. Now, principle five, which promotes that businesses should respect and promote human rights, focuses on wage paid to contract labor and focuses on median wage and gender pay gap. This we will be discussing more in the upcoming slides. But uh, if we look at how we can link this and we look at the links and risk prioritization. Uh, Next slide, please. No, Neha, you can go back to previous. Okay. So now, under the UN guiding principles, we assess risk based on the severity of the impact on people. Now, here we are trying to link the reporting lens, which is BRSR, with the risk prioritization. Now, wages and human right. Here we can see that insufficient pay violates a worker right to an adequate standard of living, which is part of UN Declaration, Article 25, and it's a foundational right. So this is something which is very important for a supplier because this is not only being taken into the Indian context, but it is also something which they have to adhere to have global compliances. Now, there on in with respect to overtime and human rights, excessive or forced overtime is a violation of the rights to rest and leisure, which is under Article 24, and is one of the clearest indicator of forced labor risk. So, if you have to uh, uh, prioritize or have to look at the risk within your supply chain and not come under the forced labor risk, you have to see that overtime and human rights components are looked properly. And then low wages are a multiplier risk. This is something that's linked to so many indicator that it's sometimes also called as multiplier risk. Now, with this, they increase the likelihood of worker taking excessive debt in their own personal life. This can also lead to using child labor to supplement income within their own family or household. And then this can also compromise safety due to fatigue. Now, prioritizing these and adequate payment can fix the root cause of multiple BHR issues. That's why it's also sometimes called multiplier risk. So this is something which I wanted to bring in because it clearly links BHR with the risk prioritization. Next slide, please. Now, minimum wages versus living wages. So, minimum wage is something which are mandatory and statutory in nature, which you have to pay, and not paying that often leads to penalties or often leads to not being compliant. So, what exactly is a minimum wage? A minimum wage is the lowest remuneration that employer can legally pay. you cannot pay anything below that. This is something that legally you are bound to pay. Now, the basis of this is often historic and tied to the capacity to pay or basic survival. So, the concept of minimum wage evolved from this requirement of how much a business can pay to worker, and later it was also based on the basic survival which is required to pay. Else, there's else it becomes very difficult to justify or define anything. Now, with respect to India, this is something mandatory, and the risk that a supplier has is legal penalty. Now, coming to the living wage, this is something which is voluntary as of now, but like we discussed, that ILO has already identified it and have defined living wages. This is something that an industry uh, can have or can try to get to living wages, because not only with respect to Segwak, but with respect to global compliances, it is something that will give an edge to producers or manufacturers or suppliers who adopt these, and also makes them future compliant. Now, definition of living wage is a remuneration which is sufficient for a decent standard of living. Now, this is something that is being calculated using different indicators. We'll come to that later. And the basis for this living wage is need-based, which can be food, housing, health, education. And this is something that sometimes also changes with the geographical location, considering that standard of living changes from one place to another. Now, the enforcement as of now is voluntary, but there is a supply chain mandate. For example, Kathleen mentioned that they are trying to uh, implement or promote living wages within their supply chain. So this is also a supply chain based mandate. Now, risk for this is business risk, reputational risk, export risk, and also sometimes compliance risk with respect to supply chain mandate. Next slide. Okay, contract worker. Right. So Nandini has very elaborately covered the contract workers, but we would still like to cover this and to iterate this with respect to the reporting lens. This also comes under BRSR Principle 5. Now, when we look at the new codes that codify and expand the protection of same work at same wage, which was previously found in the Contract Labor Regulation and Abolition Act of 1970. Now, this expansion or adoption of same work is equal to same wage is very important, and we'll see this that it not only with respect to contract workers, but also with respect to any fixed term worker. It implies that anyone who is doing the same work is entitled to get the same wage. Now, the old rule mandated equal wages if work was similar to regular workmen. Now, often the limitation over there was that it can be circumvented by changing job titles, because it was very specifically linked to someone doing the same regular work or this job title. Now, in the new regime, in Section 23 and Schedule 2, it mandates parity in wages, holiday, and hours. And Code on Wages also prohibits discrimination. Now, here employee definition have been widened to cover contract staff for wage purposes. Now, the impact of this is that now the statutory liability falls strictly on the principal employer to ensure parity. Now, what happens over here is that uh, under this OSH code, if contract workers, even a contract worker performs similar work to a permanent employee, they are entitled to the same wage, rates, holiday, and hours. Now, as principal employer, here one cannot hide disparity behind a contractor. One cannot say that we are not entitled, or this does not come under the purview of the law because it is being contracted, or any work is being contracted. Now, a principal employer is liable for ensuring this parity, and auditing the contractor payroll is now a mandatory due diligence step as well. Next slide. Now, uh, in wage disparity and gender gap, we see that this also comes under the BRSR Principle 5. And wages are also a very key ESG metric. Now, the BRSR requires reporting on the median wage disparity between executive and the median employee. Closing this, and what this means is that now one has to also look at the disparity in wages. The difference, the greater the difference, the higher the impact it will have on your BRSR report. And furthermore, we also see that women are often overrepresented in lower pay tiers. This also widens the wage gap. Now, when we adopt a living wage strategy, it is often sees that it is an effective way to raise the floor of female workers as well. This also, this also This also try to remove the gap, or address the gap that we have when it comes to pay. And it also directly contribute to closing not only the gender pay gap, but also the wage disparity in general. Next slide. Now, question is, how do we calculate the living wage? So, as we have seen from the poll, there are suppliers who are already following the living wage, uh, must some standard of living wage. Unfortunately, we do not have a poll question that would help us identify that. But the question is that how do we calculate the living wage? So there are different methodology that we have, which are widely accepted. So one is anchor methodology, and this is usually favored because it is not only used by the Global Living Wage Coalition, but also by the SAI. Now, Asia Floor Wage Alliance is another organization which works uh, on the formula of getting a living wage, but this is usually or has been adopted mostly by unions and rights group. Now, the reason for that is also because it focuses primarily on purchasing power parity, and this is also have been very limited to the garment hubs of Asia. Next is Fair Wage Network, which is comprehensive database, and it uses 12 different dimension for fair wages. But this has been mostly used by investors and ESG ratings. So let's say, for example, someone who is dependent, or their businesses uh, rely heavily on sustainability reports and ESG ratings, they can also use the standard of Fair Wage Network. Here we have taken, next slide. here we have taken anchor methodology because this is something that is being used by SAI, and looking at the industry, which is chemical industry, I believe over here. Uh, Certifications, especially with respect to safety and social dimensions, are important. So we are taking a look at the anchor methodology. Now, the formula of calculating living wage through this says that cost of a basic but decent life for a family divided by the number of workers per family. Now, in some cases, we see that we take household as two adults and two children. In some places, we also have uh, three or four children taking into account, as I came across few days ago.
Yeah,
Uh,
also what we've seen, for example, that in China, usually they're taking only one child into account. In other countries, they're taking only one and a half salaries, so that one probably stays home or half home to take care of the kids. And in a couple of countries where there's more children, it can also be three children or even less people working, depending on what are the childcare needs.
yeah. Um, so this is also important, but here, at least in anchor methodology, it's divided by not only the father or one member, but number of workers per family. How many number of workers are there? Now, in this, the key component that usually is taken is first food, which should be a nutritious diet, low cost nutritious diet. And for that, we have a WHO standard, which can be taken into account to define that what would comprise of a low cost nutritious diet. Then we have housing, a decent standard of housing, which constitute of a house which has ventilation, water, and electricity. And education and health, which are the essential services under the education and health. For example, let's say in case of India, you have ESI's benefits to full-time or permanent worker. So whether those are being covered, and if they are not being covered, what essential services and their costings are taken into account. And a 5% of emergency contingency is part of that. Here, as Kathleen was saying, reference for a family in different countries have different standards. The anchor methodology usually have two adults plus two children. The work cycle is being calculated on a standard work week of 48 hours, which is also a national maximum limit of India under the new wage code, which is similar to what we have earlier. But then we had a lot of different regulations under that as well. Now, across India, under the new labor code, it is fixed 40, the cap is 48 hours per week, and that is what is being taken into account in the anchor methodology always, as well. And overtime, but one thing that we have to keep in mind, that overtime is excluded from living wage calculation. One cannot include overtime is as something which within the calculation of the living wage. Next slide. Okay, now we have an interactive poll. Now here we want to understand that whether you have had done a wage gap analysis, which is basically the wage that you pay and the living wage, and against any benchmark in the last 2 years. So far, we have 100% participation from 17 answers. Okay. So so here we can see that around 24% have fully done the wage gap analysis, and I think it also resonates with the earlier poll result that we had, where we had around 18% who are already following any living wage standard. Some have done it partially, but we see that majority of them, around 47%, have not done it, and around 12% have not explored the idea of wage gap analysis. So let's get to understand what wage gap analysis is, and let's see if for you how much. Just a second. And okay, let's get into understanding the wage gap analysis. Neha, next slide. Okay, so when we talk about the gap or the wage gap analysis, it basically means the actual wage that you are paying, whether it's the wage which is minimum wage that you are paying, or the union or contractual agreement that you have, or if you are already paying any living wage through based on any standard. Now, the reason or the question would be that why one would want to measure it. Now there can be different arguments for this, but it's as simple as if you want to implement and adopt living wage, one would have to do this gap analysis so that you can also understand that within your businesses how you can uh, bring that gap within your businesses so that it doesn't feel like an added cost. Because a general observation that has been seen is that living wage is not something which directly falls on supplier or a businesses, but there are multiple benefits which also economically take care of its own. And for that, we have to see that what's the gap that's there within your businesses and supply chain. Now, the reason to measure are one, that build transparency and trust with the global buyers who, for example, we discussed that how supply chain also mandates living wages. It also prepares you for future minimum wage revisions, and also prepares you for any future living wage mandate that can come within your supply chain. And it also improves retention in a competitive skilled labor market. So I hope the wage gap, how we do it, is clear. And in any case, we would be taking questions on it. Next slide. Overtime. So now the overtime comes under the legal framework of OSH code. Earlier, the overtime limits, weekly limit were the same, which was 48 hours with respect to India. But daily overtime, daily limit of standard working hour was 9 hours. Sorry, I think I have given some wrong, misread something. It's not overtime, but the standard limit used to be 48 hours, and it's still 48 hours. but the daily limit used to be 9 hours. Now it was spread over estimated as 10.5 hours, including rest. Now, the overtime mandatory premium under the new code and earlier also is 2 times of the ordinary rate of wages. And now in the standard limit, overtime daily limit have been raised up to 12 hours. But we also have to see that the weekly cap is still same, which is 48 hours. So now in India, a daily standard limit of working can be up to 12 hours, but one has to be wary of the fact that it cannot cross 48 hours within a week. Next slide. Okay. So, like we were discussing, the limit which earlier under the Factories Act used to be 50 hours. There were also in some state under Factories Act which allowed up to 75 hours, and there were certain exemptions which are state rules which said that up to 115 or 125 hour is um, possible. But these are based on the earlier acts that we have and have been challenged multiple times. And there have been cases where Supreme Court have also given verdict against it. So anyway, this is something which is not applicable anymore, especially from November 21st of this month. So we'll it's important that we stick with the new rules that we have. Uh, Next slide. Neha. Okay. Now, to give you a clear idea of how it used to be earlier, I have taken a state example of Maharashtra and Gujarat. So, if we look at Maharashtra, Factories Rule Amendment came in 2015 that exempted under Section 5 exceptional workload, and the limit was increased to 115 hours per quarter. Now, this required adherence to condition no more than 7 days at a stretch. Similarly, in Gujarat, we had a notification in 2020 during the pandemic, which limited the uh, which had the attempted 72-hour work week, but it was struck down by the Supreme Court. Now, the current status is that back to standard exemption, which is usually 75 to 100 hours, depending on sector. But again, this is something that we had in past. Now, everything has been subsumed under the new labor codes, and we will have the same standard unless we have notifications coming from the states, which will have to see once the state and center together start implementing the new labor codes. Next slide, Neha. Now, calculation rules. Under the code on wages, we'll now see that how do we calculate it and how it feeds into calculation of overtime. Now, the new code on wages talks about the divide by 26 rules, which now clearly says that one cannot take into account the 30 or 31 days as a work day within a month. And where the monthly rate of wages is to be calculated, the daily rate of wage shall be calculated by dividing the monthly rate of wages by 26. Now, one of the reason for 26 is also because it accounts for 4 weekly holidays in a 30-day month. This is legally mandated, and this is also the number which is mandated for daily rate calculation. Next slide. Now, to calculate, for example, a daily and hourly rate, which would later help one to calculate the overtime. Let's take a scenario where a skilled operator whose monthly gross wage is around rupees 26,000. Now, this monthly wage comprises of, in Indian context, basic plus DA plus any allowances that one is getting. Now, when we talk about the daily wage, the monthly wage has to be divided by 26, which comes to approximately 1,000 per day. And if we divide it by the standard 8 hour per day, then the hourly rate we have is 125 rupees. Now we'll see the importance of basic DA and allowance later in next slide. Neha, next slide, please. Now, in the scenario that we took, the hourly rate came to rupees 125. Now, when we talk about calculating the overtime, we have to multiply that with 2 times. So, for example, someone who has worked for, let's say, approximately 10 hours within that month, all those 10 hours overtime rate would be twice of what the actual wage they would get. Now, here one thing that we have to keep in account is that this actual wage cannot be the basic wage, which we said that a wage is a combination of basic plus dearness allowance plus other allowance. So I think we'll also see this in our next slide. Yeah, yeah. So here, a lot of time people fall in this trap uh, where they calculate where they calculate the overtime only on the basic pay. Now, the wage code defines wages which includes basic plus DA plus any allowance that you are getting. So to calculate overtime, we have to be often wary of the fact that we cannot calculate it on the basic, but we'll have to calculate it on the gross ordinary wages. So twice of the gross ordinary wages. This ensures that your payroll software includes DA in OT base rate calculation. So this is something that has to be taken into account. Sometimes sometimes if it's not included within the software also. I mean, we are talking only about a scenario over here. Next slide. Okay, so coming back to our next poll, how do we calculate risk? Now, this question, does your current payroll software automatically include dearness allowance in overtime base rate, is something that will also help us understand that whether we have a clear understanding of overtime. So we already have 4, 5 participants, 7, 9. So we have, let's say, 50 more seconds, minute. So we have only 13 answers so far. I'm hoping that we have at least 17 responses so that we have some parity with the earlier polls. Okay, so we have 30. Now, let's get back to the poll results. We see that almost 38% are clear about it, and they verify it. They have verified, and they include DA in their DA and allowance in their software. But we also see that there are some where only basic is being taken, and there are around 31%, same as the basic only, where it's not very sure. So we can assume that this can go either way. So what this tells us that now with the new wage code and the simplification of different laws, it's important that we include the DA as well as any other alliance into our software so that we do not get into the trap that we were talking about in our previous slide. This is something uh, which has been widely seen and reported in my experience with respect to working in different supply chain. And I have often seen that this is sometimes due to the lack of information within the technical team, and sometime it could be other reasons, and it can never go in favor of an industry or a supplier. So this is something that I hope is clear to everyone. Next slide. Neha. Another important aspect of new OSH code is safety and inclusion. Now, here, with respect to night shifts for women, we have to see that it's only 7 p.m. to 6. Uh, we see that up to 7 p.m. It's fine, but for anything that goes from 7 p.m. to 6 a.m., one has to have written consent. One has to ensure that they get safe transportation, and one has to ensure that within their own soft floor or within their own factories, there are adequate supervision. So these are a couple of things which one has to be very careful of, because now with the simplification of new laws coming into different code, uh, it's it's something which is not very easy for anyone to get away with. And one of the challenge of earlier laws was that there was a lot of limitation with respect to awareness. Now, with these codes, I'm pretty sure that the awareness among the people, among the workers, among different stakeholder will improve, and similarly, it will also improve the situation of implementation of or adherence to the compliances. So this is something which one has to be very careful about, and also considering that this industry is, this industry is very uh, high risk or hazardous environmental industry. We also have to ensure that we are managing the fatigue. So excessive OT often leads to safety risk, which was also pointed out by Kathleen. And to ensure that, we need to have safety committees. So any factory which has 250 plus workers, it's mandatory for them to have a safety committee and to review the work hours. Next slide, Neha. Now, from this session, I hope it was in some or many ways have been informative. But also on top of that, there are certain advisory suggestions or advices that we can think of, or that we think is very important, is one which is that immediate actions that one can take, and also long-term action that one should take. So immediately we see that the in audit payroll logic, you ensure that you divide the wage by 26, and also ensure that basic plus DA rules are active, which we saw that in 31% of the responses that we had, they are not including it, and also 31% who are not aware of it might not be including it. So this is one very important aspect of this session. Second, we see that we also verify notifications, check the specific quarterly OT limit of your state. Now, at this point of time, we do not have every state notification, but considering that quite recently the new codes have been rolled out, so quarterly OT limits within every state has to be checked. And also, if I mean, not the 150-hour exemptions, but new exemptions that might come in. And try to integrate digitized consent so that you can implement digital written consent forms for all overtime and night shifts. This will ensure the efficiency, and also help suppliers secure the consents. Now, when we talk about the long-term actions that can help a supplier, is one, to conduct gap analysis or wage gap analysis, which we saw that not everyone is doing. This is important if you want to implement or move towards implementing living wage in your supply chain, is that you either use Anchor or whatever standard that fits your business and your policy commitments. Anchor is only an example. We are not endorsing Anchor. Uh, then you have to plan the roadmap. So let's say, I can understand for an industry, it's not easy to close the gap overnight, but you have a long-term plan and focus on closing the gap rather than looking for closing the gap. I mean, there could be many means of closing the gap. Sometimes it's only on paper. So, in spite of falling to that trap, it makes sense to have a long-term plan so that eventually you are able to avoid this risk altogether. And then the transparent reporting. So share your roadmap with global buyers to satisfy their requirement. It could be CSRD, CSDD, whatever their requirements are. So a transparent reporting it not only help your businesses, but also help your business partner, your buyers, to have their own compliances, strengthen their own compliances. Next slide. So coming back to the end of the slide, which is the summary. Uh, so what are mandatory and what are strategic, um, uh, learnings that we have? That mandatory, we have to pay minimum wage anyhow, but we have to ensure that we are moving towards living wage. We have to pay 2 times OT, which should include both basic plus DA, and we have to adhere to 48-hour limit within a week. Uh, Although the law says up to 12 hours, then again, realistically, it puts you in a situation where working for 12 hours in a day would then um, inversely affect the overtime in coming days. And strategically, we would say that measure the living wage gap, adopt any methodology uh, to understand or to have the wage gap analysis, and protect and work towards having a sustainable supply chain and ethical supply chain eventually will help you protect your own supply chain status. Thank you, Neha. Next, last slide, I hope. So, for any uh, queries, I think you can reach out to Nandini, me, Neha, or Ritika. And I've tried my best to cover everything, but I'm pretty sure there must be a lot of things that I might have missed, and would be happy to take those even if it's not today, but later on. Thank you.
Kathleen, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, exactly. So I've seen that quite a few questions were coming in, and some we were waiting till the end. So thank you very much for this very detailed presentation. So I hope it gave a good deep dive. And even though there was a focus on India, I think there's also, it does have global relevance as we see in our own operations. So there was a question about what are the details of the living wage and what is it specifically for Punjab. So I think the details Purushottam explained really well. I would like to share what we used as a pragmatic approach to make a living wage analysis. And keep in mind, we have more than 5,000 people in 35 countries, and the living wage is also different by region. So if you're living in Delhi or in a rural region, or in Germany, if you're living in Munich, or I don't know, somewhere in the countryside, it can be completely different. So it needs to be looked by region. And our challenge when we did the risk analysis and seen that most of our organizations have not done a living wage analysis, we were also in front of that challenge. Where do we actually get it? Yeah, and back then, that was almost 2 years ago. Most companies basically did their own living wage analysis, or it was really difficult to get to, and it's expensive as well. But luckily now the wage indicator has published, let's say, a summary. And let me share my screen shortly to show you that, and I will also then distribute the link later. So go. Can you see it? Nia, can you see my screen?
Yes, it's visible. Yeah.
So you see here that's the wage indicator, and they've basically collected a lot of living wage studies and published them to go on there. And this is what we use, and it was very pragmatic. But of course, it's not as straightforward. You have to check a little bit, but I think depending on the number of locations, it's not that difficult. So you would pick the country where you're in, and then you have different possibilities, fast track, or yourself as employee. Just to show, I've chosen the fast track. They ask, are you self-employed? No, and then you can choose the region. And for example, here in Punjab, I've seen there's even 3 different Punjab regions or divisions that you could choose. And then it becomes a bit interesting because you're entering your current value, and then it tells you, are you above or below? So you have to go up and down a little bit. So if you're down a little bit, then you're below. So until you're finding it. It sounds like a bit of work, but to be honest, if you have 2-3 locations, it's done in 10 minutes. We had someone in our global HR department to look into this and really check where are all the regions where we're working and what is it, and then basically conducting it. And then we were able to compare it with the lowest wages. You can also go more in detail when you go here. There's many, oh, you don't see it. There's many additional things that you could enter. And here then it later asks, what are the allowances included, all that kind of thing. And it's also very clear overtime is not included. Um, what we're then doing, since let's say we did it at the beginning of the year, but we see that many regions where we are present, Turkey, Argentina, many others, the inflation is quite, let's say, a lot. So we stop the sharing. To not have to do that every year, we agreed that we will check on the average inflation and thus prognose what would be the living wage in the next year. But then if we see there was too much, then we're going back to the website and seeing, do they have maybe new data, things like that. Yeah, and I think this is quite a pragmatic way to get it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Kathleen. There was also a question around, I think, the basic difference between living wage and minimum wage. In case you would like to take that, Purushottam, though you've already explained it, but I think maybe a bit more in detail.
Yes. And I guess there was also a question on the wage ceiling, if there is any. So the center and state will, since it comes under concurrent list, they will come together and will publish a national floor wage, but it is yet to come. Second question was the difference between minimum wage and living wage, right? Yeah. So, like I mentioned during the start of the presentation, uh, the evolution of wage have happened initially on the basis of requirement, that what's the minimum requirement for someone to survive, and for which has slowly evolved into state and government coming in picture and defining minimum wage. Now, this minimum wage is something which is mandatory, because this is something which government or the system understand is very important for someone to sustain. For example, in every states you will have minimum wage for skilled worker, minimum wage for unskilled worker, and minimum wage for semi-skilled worker. This also there are also notifications on different sectors. So we are talking about something which used to be the case, or is at least at present, which will eventually change with the new code coming when we have new national floor wages. But that's what the living wage used to be. Now, minimum wage used to be. Now, the living wage is something which talks about having a decent life of a worker who is supposed to be able to not only survive, but able to live in a society with basic minimum requirements. That's important. For example, house, or a shelter. For example, basic health services. For example, uh, um, education for their children. Now, those components have to be taken care when we define a living wage. Now, living wage standards, like Kathleen mentioned, could be different on various components. For example, it can vary location to location, because a living standard cost of one place could be very different in another place. For example, with respect to India, let's say if we take living wage for Asia Floor Wage Alliance, this used to be something around 26 or 28,000 few years back. Now the same living wage could be very less in, let's say, Kanpur. Let's say, for example, Kanpur is an industrial area, or in Agra, it can be different. It can even come up to 18,000, 17,000, or even less than that. So that's the living wage, which try to give your worker a decent life, not only survival. I hope that answers the question. Any more questions?
Um, there is one. It says that can we say and understand wages over and above minimum wage is living wage?
Maybe I take that.
Sure.
I've read a study that only in 17 countries in the world, the minimum wage is high enough to actually cover the living wage, due to different reasons. Let's say general salary levels, which might be quite low, but also, as I mentioned before, living standards. From a German example, I easily pay 50% more for rent in Munich than in another big German city in Cologne. Or things like Mexico City being extremely expensive to live in, apart from the countryside. That's why you really have to look into if your minimum wage covers the living wage. And I think what I've shown you before, the website is quite nice. It also says that in case the minimum wage covers the living wage, then it automatically shows you that one. So that means you're also automatically compliant. So there is definitely no automatism. Let's say I know that in Germany, the northern European countries, and France, the minimum wage covers the living wage. If you're not in a major city, but even in the US, I would definitely double check. And in many other countries, I would say the same. So if I clearly state your question, we can say that if you're paying above the minimum wage, no, you're not automatically above the living wage. You need to check.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Kathleen.
Yes, living wage
And
minimum wage can be the living wage, but only in 17 countries in the world. And from your name, in India, it's not.
yeah, we're far away from that. But thank you so much, Puneet. We appreciate your questions, and that is really the point of this webinar, to go deeper into the concepts and really understand the fundamentals. So, with this, I think we could. Okay, Puneet has one more. Is it okay, Kathleen
For
and
me, that's
Purushottam?
totally fine. Totally
Okay,
fine.
okay. Please,
Yeah.
Puneet, go ahead. Please share your question.
Also, for everyone who's joining, I think all of you have my email or the email Sustainable Procurement at Siegwerk. Always feel free to ask any questions if you need more details on this topic. And we know from our own experience this is quite challenging already in your own organization, but also then if you're looking into contractors that you're employing, cleaning personnel, security guards, which are working at your site. But then if you're looking at your suppliers, it becomes even more challenging. So it's really important to do your due diligence and really raise the importance of that topic. So who is in India taking up this study to support this cause? Can you please details? To be honest, I don't know who's doing these studies. I think it's NGOs that you can employ who are doing these studies. But the living wage, the one has collected a lot of studies. But Niha, maybe you can answer that question. If there's a general, maybe government body or something, I don't know.
There are a few think tanks. There are also international institutes like the ILO, and there's Fair Wage, which Purushottam had mentioned. There are also academic representatives doing this. We know of one Professor Devnathan, and TIS in Mumbai is also doing a lot of work around the academic piece. But Purushottam, would you like to share your opinion here?
Yeah, so like Neha mentioned, there are academicians who are working and supporting, because this is living the concept of living wage and defining standards for living wage at local level is something which is being taken up by academicians initially, and also civil society organizations. For example, one organization which is Asia Floor Wage has its own office in India, in Bangalore. Although it's based on purchasing power parity, but they are also who are identifying and can have standard living wage calculations. So if someone wants to do the living wage calculation, you have the formulas, you have the detailed instructions. You can also use that to calculate. If it is required as a service, I think this is something that Neha can reach out to, or someone can reach out to Neha, and you can.
Yeah, you can surely reach out to us. And there's also, I think, Ambedkar University, there is Professor Nidhi Kaikar, who we have interacted with quite a bit. She was working with Anchor. She was looking at how to apply Anchor methodology in India, from what I remember. So yes, you can, of course, reach out to us, and maybe we can send you some references. But great questions. And I see there is one more. Are there any authorized agencies that can verify our living wage compliance? I am actually not sure about this. Maybe Kathleen or Purushottam, would you guys know of these authorized agencies?
I know that there are some, but I don't have the names with me yet. So maybe I'll put them, we research and put them in the Q&A
Yeah.
once we send out the material.
Right, right. Great question. Thank you for that. And okay, I have Puneet's final comment saying thank you all. Thank you actually, and thank you Rubina and all the others for their questions. We really appreciate the queries that come in, and that makes our job more interesting. So thank you. And with this, we actually close the series of this webinar. This was the final one, the fourth one in the series. So um, I mean, kudos to Kathleen for organizing this and to Siegwerk for bringing all the suppliers together. And these are very, very important topics. So we hope, while this is the last webinar, but we hope to continue the conversation. Maybe before we sign in, if any of you want to come in, I'd see Nandini, in case you want to come in, or anybody else, just to close the conversation. Most welcome.
Yeah, I think I would thank you all again. First, of course, our participants for joining, and thank you very much. These are really important topics that we would like to push in our supply chain to become more sustainable, but also more resilient in today's world. And yeah, last but not least, thank you very much, CRB. It's been great working with you for all the details, for the knowledge that you've shared. Yeah, looking forward to our next projects.
Yeah, maybe just to wrap things up, I think I'll also probably chip in here with a big thank you to the Siegwerk team, to all the suppliers who've been with us throughout the webinar series. I think what would be also very good is that, we keep the engagement, on, which is to say that if you have questions, if there is something specific that you would, want to give to us as feedback, etc., please feel free to reach out to us. And our endeavor has always been to sort of see how we can better things. But again, like a big sort of a congratulations to also the Siegwerk team that they've taken on this task, and they have put in all of that effort and resources and time to come up with such a well thought out program. So yeah, with that, just a big thank you to everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye. Have a good day ahead.
See you soon. Bye.